They've got what I'm saying here. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dave Eldon. I'm from Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I'm the man behind Judging for the Win. Everybody be sure to go on YouTube and Twitch and subscribe to my channels right away. I promise that's the last self-promotion that we're going to hear. Except for halfway through, there might be an unskippable ad for Brilliant, so there might be something like that. So, triggered abilities. Step one, we're going to talk about what triggered abilities are and a little bit about how they work. Hopefully this should be more or less a rehash for pretty much everybody in here, but I want to make sure that everybody's starting from the same page. Oh gosh, yeah. If you guys want to send stuff to my PO box, I'll unbox it on stream too. So, triggered abilities are easy to identify because they have one of three different words in the English Oracle text of the card. So they'll always contain either at, when, or whenever. And if an ability has one of those, it's a triggered ability. If it doesn't have one of those, it's not a triggered ability. And that's just that simple. So identifying triggered abilities, at least they made that part easy for us. Might get a little bit more complicated later on, but it's going to be a little bit more difficult, I promise. So here's some examples to get everybody acquainted with the idea of looking for them. You can see I highlighted on the slide the card where it says at, when, or whenever on the card. And notice that there is a little bit of a cheat because for the elephant grass example, the word at does definitely appear, but you would have to look in the comprehensive rules to be able to see where it actually says. So that is something that you have to be aware of. In some cases, the word at, when, or whenever actually appears in the comprehensive rules definition of some keyworded ability on the card. So that is kind of a gotcha. You might want to be aware of that. Certain times it'll be in the reminder text, but of course there is not reminder text on all the cards, and there isn't accurate reminder text that is kept up with all of the Oracle updates on all of the cards either. So that's a little bit of an example that you can use to get everybody acquainted with looking for triggered abilities. Okay, so here are some non-examples. And if you look at these cards, neither of them use the word at, when, or whenever anywhere on the card. And so these are not examples of triggered abilities. These are instead different types of abilities. And so with Meddling Mage, it seems like you would be able to respond to Meddling Mage entering the battlefield to Lightning Bolt it before they name Lightning Bolt, but that is in fact not how it works. The same thing with Progenitus. This type of ability has been where if it would be put into a graveyard, shuffle it into its owner's library. That type of thing is still, some cards have it as a triggered ability and other cards do not. So, okay. Now, we can identify triggered abilities, making no problem, but the next step is going to be how triggered abilities work. And so, this is kind of a broad strokes general idea overview of how triggered abilities work. So if the Progenitus ability is not a triggered ability, what is it? It is a replacement effect. Replacement effect uses the word instead, and that is what triggered ability, or that is what word Progenitus specifically uses in its ability. Another example would be something like Emrakul, the Eon's Torn. That ability is in fact a triggered ability because it says when it's put into a graveyard, not if it would be put into a graveyard. So great question from Sage Steven. So how do triggered abilities work? Well, this is it, and this is like ripped straight out of the comprehensive rules. I just kind of paraphrased what they said a little bit to make it more entertaining. So anytime something happens in the game, the magical fairies will check to see if what happened matches the trigger condition of any triggered abilities. And if it does, then the fairies will write that triggered ability on a whiteboard. And then anytime a player would get priority, the game first performs state-based actions, and then it takes all the triggered abilities from the whiteboard and it puts them on the stack, and then it erases the whiteboard. So, we've got some people who said they lost the audio. Does anybody else still hear me? Okay, we've got some people who can still hear and some people who can't. Okay. Okay. So, that's how triggered abilities work. Anything triggers in the game, the magic fairy is right on the whiteboard. Anytime the whiteboard has stuff written on it and the game is about to give someone priority, first they check for state-based actions, and then all the stuff from the whiteboard goes on the stack. So that is the situation. That is how it works. So we'll go through a couple of example questions to help everybody see exactly some consequences of that. So step one, example question number one. Player has Eternal Witness, and I'm going to play my Eternal Witness, and I made a mistake. And I made a mistake because I didn't remember when I played my Eternal Witness that my opponent has Elesh Norn, the Grand Cenobite, in play. So, of course, the Eternal Witness is going to die immediately after it comes into play. Now, my question is, can I mitigate this mistake by using Eternal Witness's triggered ability to return Eternal Witness itself to my hand? So we can type yes in the chat if you think you can return Eternal Witness with its own ability. No if you cannot. And we've got some early results say that you can, and that is indeed the case. So one thing I want to interject in here before I go through too many of these questions, and that is that we do have the bot that can bring up the card text here. In my presentation, I went through and I edited it all. All of the cards have their correct Oracle text printed on them. And in cases where the card doesn't actually have its relevant Oracle text, I made some edits so that is in fact on the card. So there should be no need to actually look stuff up in the Scryfall bot if you can see the pictures, because the pictures will not mislead you this time. They might in a real game of Magic. If you're in an actual game of Magic, they might mislead you, but I promise, I'm pledging to all of my people here that in fact all the text that you read on cards today will be correct text. So let's talk a little bit about why this works now that we have the correct answer. So what will happen is the following. We play the Eternal Witness, and Eternal Witness will enter the battlefield. And the magical fairies are like, yes, I see a triggered ability that says when Eternal Witness enters the battlefield. So they're going to write that triggered ability on the whiteboard. And then the next step is going to be the game checks for state-based actions, which dying from 0 or less toughness is. And then the Eternal Witness goes away and into the graveyard. And then that triggered ability goes onto the stack. And when you go onto the stack, then you can choose the target for it. And when you choose the target for it, the Eternal Witness is already in the graveyard. So hey, yeah, it's definitely a card that's in your graveyard that you can target, that you can return. Okay, so we've got a good suggestion here. So instead of spamming yeses and nos from now on, we will be reacting thumbs up or thumbs down to a question that I write in the chat. So that is a great idea, and we will be doing that from now on. So let's examine. Do you lose one life if those two modes are chosen with Austere Command? So, question, don't you choose the target just before the trigger goes on the stack? Yes, you do. You do choose the target just before the trigger goes on the stack, and just before the trigger goes on the stack, it is actually a part of putting the triggered ability on the stack, so I guess if you want to get semantic about it. But the time when you do put the triggered ability on the stack and the time when you do choose the target are in the process of taking the triggered abilities off the whiteboard and putting them on the stack. And that process happens after all of the state-based actions happen. So that is the answer to your question, Allie. So let's take a look at the poll that we wrote. So we have one person that says we do lose one life. With that, we've got some others. So it looks like, ooh, there's a no. We've got one no vote and many yes votes. And so we are going to go ahead and call the election right now. The answer is yes. So if you destroy all artifacts and destroy all small creatures, you do lose one life. And so the reason for that is if you take a look at austere command, look at what it does. We destroy all artifacts first, and then we destroy all small creatures. So the instructions are followed in the order that they are written on the card. And so because we destroy all artifacts first, Disciple of the Vault is still in play when Hexplate Golem is put into a graveyard. And as a result of that, there will be a triggered ability that matches what just happened when that happens, and so the fairies will write it on the whiteboard. Now, if you destroy all small creatures and destroy all big creatures, that is a great point, Mark. And so that is the opposite answer. Because if you destroy all creatures with 3 or less and destroy all creatures with 4 or greater, again, that is the order that those happen. So first we will destroy Disciple of the Vault, then we will destroy Hexplate Golem, and then there will be no triggered abilities that matches because Disciple of the Vault will already be dead. And so indeed, that is why we chose those specific artifact and that specific creature and that specific removal spell. Now, the next... First of all, I guess before we move to the next slide, is there any questions about that example? All right, so it looks like we're doing all right there. So the next one is going to be a very similar question, but with Day of Judgment. So with Day of Judgment, we won't go through the whole process for it because I'm going to save that for a little bit later in the presentation. To explain exactly why this happens, but with Day of Judgment, it destroys all creatures at the same time, so you actually will lose 1 life in that case too. So, next step is the order of triggered abilities. So far, we just have the situation where you take all the triggered abilities off the whiteboard and you put them on the stack. But that's a little bit different. That can be a little bit more complicated than the hand-wavy explanation that I just gave. For example, let's say there's 2 triggered abilities that are on the whiteboard, right? You can't just put them both on the stack at the same time because that's kind of the purpose of the stack. Anyone who was around when they had batches knows that having all the triggered abilities try and resolve at the same time is not what you want to do. So, indeed, what we have is a couple of rules, and those are on this slide, for how you decide what order the triggered abilities go on the stack from the whiteboard. So once stuff's on the whiteboard, you can put it on the stack in the following way. The AppNap rule means that the triggered abilities from the active player go on the stack first, and then the triggered abilities from the non-active player go on the stack on top of them. And the other rule is if there are more than 1 triggered abilities controlled by a single player, that player is the one who chooses the order that they're put on. So if I control 5 triggered abilities, I get to choose what order they all are on. So makes sense, hopefully, to everybody, and we'll give you guys a concrete example starting now. And this was a really great one. I remember this one came up a lot. So if you use Eldrazi Displacer with Thought-Knot Seer, you exile Thought-Knot Seer, which causes its leaves the battlefield, draw a card ability to trigger, and then you return it to the battlefield, which causes its enters the battlefield ability to trigger. And so, because I control both of those triggered abilities, I can choose what order they go on the stack. So, usually the smart way to do it would be to put the leaves the battlefield ability on the stack so that it happens before the comes into the battlefield ability. And that way they'll draw the card first, and then I'll get to look at it in their hand and decide if I want to let them keep it or not. And that is, of course, the opposite order from what is actually happening, but indeed that is a legal ordering. That is a legitimate thing that you can do because of what we talked about on the previous slide. The player will not get priority until after all of the stuff from Eldrazi Displacer's ability happens. And so with that being the case, the Thought-Knot Seer's triggered abilities will both be on the whiteboard at the same time and will therefore be tried to be put on the stack at the same time. Oblivion Ring is another great example of that card. If you use some sort of a flicker effect on Oblivion Ring, what will happen is you exile and then you return it to the battlefield. And it works with Oblivion Ring because there are 2 separate triggered abilities. It doesn't work with the new ability that they usually would write with the new templating. It doesn't work the same way. Yeah, Banishing Light, it does not work, and that is because there's only one triggered ability there. There's no ordering. Mangara of Corondor happened, I believe. It had the same type of a thing. Okay, so another triggered ability question. So, new question. Gatekeeper and Traveler trade in combat. Can I sacrifice the Doomed Traveler token to Abyssal Gatekeeper's ability? So we'll give people a few seconds to vote on this this question here. Okay, so we've got some questions. We've got some questions here. So no, I do not control both. They trade in combat. So because Abyssal Gatekeeper starts with A, we'll say that Abyssal Gatekeeper is controlled by the active or attacking player. Doomed Traveler is blocking, and Abyssal Gatekeeper is attacking. Alright, so if Abyssal Gatekeeper is attacking and Doomed Traveler is blocking, what will happen is both of those triggered abilities will be put on the whiteboard, and then the active player, Abyssal Gatekeeper, will put their triggered abilities on the stack first, and then Doomed Traveler, the non-active player, will put their triggered abilities on the stack after. So you will create the token, and then you will be able to sacrifice, but the sacrifice happens after the token is created. So indeed, that will work as stated. So the majority of you have gotten that question correct. And so as many of you pointed out in the comments, yes, it does matter with whether the Abyssal Gatekeeper is attacking or blocking, because as you pointed out, if the Doomed Traveler is attacking the Abyssal Gatekeeper, the triggered abilities will be switched because the active player will be opposite from what it was in the first case. And as a result of that, the triggered ability for making the token will not have resolved when the Abyssal Gatekeeper's one is on the stack on top and will resolve first. So that is kind of a cute little interaction there. I hope everybody appreciates that. Any questions on Abyssal Gatekeeper and Doomed Traveler? Oh yeah. Okay, good. So next question, and this is another one of my personal favorites. This one came out from the new set digest from Theros 2. This is Thassa, God of the Sea, and Painseer. So question is, can I scry first, then draw? And by draw, I, of course, am referring to the thing that Painseer lets you do. So the abilities in question are: at the beginning of your upkeep, scry 1, and when this becomes untapped, reveal the top card of your library and put that card in your hand. Okay, so we've got like some ups and downs and some questions and minuses. Untap does happen before upkeep. Yes, that is a true statement. So we have several yeses and several no's. So this one makes me feel a little bit better now, because we've got like 20 to 25% of people is saying no, and the rest saying yes. So that's a good one. We've got some people who voted for both, hedging their bets. Excellent. I like it. So we'll let everybody get their things in. I'm seeing that there's probably about 50-ish people that we can expect to vote, so we're pretty close to the end. So look at that. That's actually very impressive. Daniel Beck with the CR citation. Unless you had that memorized, that's pretty gosh darn impressive. So that's one of those things that I would have expected myself to put in there, but I in fact did not look that one up. So recall that the way things work is we look to see all the time whether something in the game happens that matches what a triggered ability says. So in this case, the thing that causes Thassa to trigger is the upkeep starts, and the thing that causes Painseer to trigger is it becoming untapped at the beginning of your untap step. So those abilities both go on the whiteboard at those specific times. But we don't clear the whiteboard off until a player would get priority. And as was pointed out in that CR citation, the priority does not go to either player during the untap step. Neither player gets priority during the untap step. And so that means that what will actually happen is Painseer untaps, that ability triggers and goes on the whiteboard. Then your upkeep starts, and Thassa's ability also triggers and goes on the whiteboard. And then players get priority. And so at that time, we will put both of those abilities from the whiteboard onto the stack. And because Painseer and Thassa player is controlled by the same person, those indeed can be put on the stack in whatever order you want. So yes, you can order these in the either way that you would like. So any questions upon that one? Oh, we've got some stealing from the whiteboard. Oh my gosh. So similar question. We have got Area Worshippers and Leyline. And yes, these are the correct wording for both of these cards. So, can I make a token and put a counter on that token? Yes or no? Alright, so we have got significantly more unanimity in this case. Looks like we have almost everybody is voting no for this one. And so this is a very similar question to the previous one, but there is one very, very important difference. And that difference, as has been pointed out, is you at the beginning still is okay. That is the same triggered ability. That is the same triggered ability condition as what we had before. So, as was pointed out, when you put it on the stack, you need to target the thing that you're going to target. And so, Area Worshippers does not let you get the bird token as soon as the ability goes on the stack. You don't get that token until after the ability resolves. And so, actually, as what everybody has been saying is, yes, you cannot target the bird token from Area Worshippers until after it has been created, and that does not happen until after that ability is resolved, and that means you cannot do it. So, okay, good. Any questions about this example? Okay, no. Okay, great. So now we're going to be moving on to some special trigger conditions. This is a type of triggered abilities, and different types of triggered abilities have different kind of trigger conditions. For the most part, it's all pretty straightforward, but certain types of triggered abilities are a little bit different. So pay to you is a special action, right? The answer to that is no. There are some certain types of costs and payments that count as special actions, but that is in fact not one of them. Paying 2 and a blue is just an action that you're allowed to do during the triggered ability resolving. So it'd be just like if you may pay 1 life from the Painseer. So yes, good call. Great question there. So okay, this one here is Archangel of Thune, and it's my favorite card that typifies this. When you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So, trying to think of how you would phrase this one in a thumbs up and a thumbs down kind of a way. There really isn't a good way, because the question is, how many +1/+1 counters would you get? If you have 2 Archangel of Thunes attacking, how many +1/+1 counters would you get on your team in total? So we've got a 4, and we've got some 2s, and we have a lot of 2s. Uh-oh. Oh, okay, now we've got another 4. Now there's a lot of 4s. Okay, this one I like. I like this a lot. So this is This is the sign that you have a great question, by the way. If you're a question writer and you see about half the people saying one thing and half the people saying the other thing, that means you're really onto something there. Okay, so the answer to this question is whenever you gain life means whenever a source causes you to gain life. And so maybe our CR reference bot can come up with that one. I probably could come up with it at some point, but I don't want to stop talking so I can look for it. There is a rule in the CR that says that. And so what this means is if I have 2 Archangel of Thunes and I attack with both of them, that means there are 2 sources that cause me to gain life, and each of the triggered abilities from the Archangel of Thunes, each Archangel of Thune is going to see 2 instances of me gaining life, so each one is going to trigger 2 times, and I will get 4 counters in total on all of my cards. Okay, hey, that's good. You know, there's one in Lifelink, and there's also another one under triggered abilities. So if you look under the 603 rules, somewhere down there, it's like towards the bottom of section 603. You should see that happening. You should see that one also. So there actually are 2 places in triggered or in the CR where it says that. So that's kind of fitting for this example question. Now, I do want to caution everybody, which is that if we have the Ripjaw Raptor, there is not a similar rule in the comprehensive rules that says that whenever this is dealt damage means whenever a source causes this to take damage. And so what that means is if I, like, say, double block the Ripjaw Raptor, yeah, it was dealt damage by 2 different sources, but that still only counts as it getting dealt damage 1 time. So this is something that I think is extremely confusing. I actually got this question wrong when I was first writing the new set digest for Ixalan, and I had to correct myself when I was doing my research because my initial impression for this was incorrect. So indeed, these are handled differently, and the reason is because the CR has a specific rule that says that Archangel of Thune gets different. That's basically what it is. So all the damage is dealt in combat at the same time. Of course, like if you have a first strike creature and a normal strike creature, then yeah, that would count as Ripjaw Raptor suffering damage in 2 different instances. But in fact, if there's no like first strike, double strike kind of shenanigans going on, then yeah, the combat damage all getting dealt at one time counts as only 1 instance of it getting dealt damage, which is not how gaining life works. So that's kind of weird, and if I were the king of the comprehensive rules, then I would probably change how one of those worked so that it synced up with the other ones. But that is in fact how it is. Any questions on that? Okay, good. So another special trigger condition. Let's say we've got our friend Ichor Mir, and we've got the 1/1 creature and the 2/3 creature blocking it. So does Ichor Mir die as a result of being blocked by the 1/1/2 or the 1/1 and the 2/3? And it looks like we have a lot of yeses and no nos. Okay, we've got one person who's got no written down in the chat instead of voting, but everybody else is saying yes. The question is, does Ichor Mir die if you block it with a 1/1 and a 2/3? So let's take a close look at exactly what this says. It says, whenever Ichor Mir becomes blocked, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So what that means is whenever Ichor Mir transitions from becoming not blocked by anything to becoming blocked by some stuff. That is the transition that this triggered ability trigger condition is looking for. And so that transition indeed only happens 1 time. And so this triggered ability will only happen one time. And so Ichor Claw Mirror will become a 3/3. Only will get the +2/+2 bonus one time. Now, there are some people who are opining that this is different from how Cave Tiger works. So Cave Tiger's Oracle text appears on screen right now. And this is the updated wording. I did have to edit this one in order to make it have the correct Oracle text so that people weren't going to get misled. But this is the, I really wish that there was some card in Magic's history that had this specific triggered condition. So, unfortunately, we had to go with making the DIY errata here. So whenever Cave Tiger becomes blocked by a creature, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So indeed, in the case of Cave Tiger, it became blocked one time, and it became blocked by a creature 2 times in this case. So what that means is that indeed Cave Tiger will be getting +2/+2 until end of turn, because that triggered ability will resolve 2 times. And so if that confuses you a little bit, you might think of some other cases where they used becomes blocked by a creature. And so in this case with the Kalaig Hand Aspirant, the triggered ability doesn't really make a lot of sense unless it triggers one time per creature. If it didn't deal 1 damage to every single creature that it was getting blocked by, then how would you really tell what creature was supposed to be getting affected by this ability and which ones weren't? So, okay, is that good with everybody? Does everybody feel comfortable with the answer to that question that was provided here? Yeah, Assembled Alpha is another good example. Okay, so that's great. So, okay, and one additional kind of special trigger condition. Can you stifle the sack and make a token ability? Please vote thumbs up for yes and thumbs down for no. Oh no, a stifle question. Well, stifle has the term triggered ability written right on the card, so that's basically, All right, so we've got 2 different. Oh, I like the different thumbs up symbol that we get there. So many people are saying thumbs up, and some people are saying thumbs down. So as has been pointed out a little bit early, yes, indeed, you can stifle that triggered ability. It says the word win right on there, so that means we know it's a triggered ability. However, Dark Depths has something really interesting. It has something called a state trigger on it. And this is not to be confused with state-based actions. This is a state trigger. And what that means is it triggers based on a specific game state. And these types of triggered abilities have special rules. So what will happen is the Dark Depths trigger condition will be met because there will be 0 counters on Dark Depths. And so the fairies will write that one on the whiteboard. And then the next time a player would get priority, it's going to go on the stack. Now, the problem is that we can't just naively end things there, because the fairies will notice with that triggered ability on the stack, hey, wait a minute, Dark Depths still has no ice counters on it, so it still has no, this triggered ability still is true, so we can put it on the whiteboard again. No, they can't. And that's the reason why. We need special rules in order to keep that type of a situation from happening. Because otherwise what would happen is it would trigger and trigger and trigger and trigger, and none of those triggers would ever get to resolve because you would just keep on putting more Dark Depths triggers on the stack. So indeed what will happen is the Stifle will counter the first instance of Dark Depths triggered ability, but as long as it's on the stack, it's preventing more Dark Depths triggered abilities from triggering and getting put on the stack. However, as soon as it's countered, it will no longer be preventing more instances of that triggered ability from going on the stack. So yes, you can stifle it, but no, you would not get any value out of doing it. What you would want to do is you would want to stifle the thing that removed the ice counter off of it, which would probably be a triggered or activated ability. So yeah, glad we've got some people who have not seen this one before. Of course, that's the goal, would be to introduce people to some stuff that they haven't seen before. So let's see what else we've got. Ooh boy. Okay, so that's a great question. Before we go on, we're gonna answer this question from Kylie here. When answering this question in an event, would you need to ask the player to be completely clear with their question so as not to give them any strategic advice? So my opinion with that is, it's important that you answer the question that they're asking. And so in this specific thing that I wrote, the question that they asked in the problem statement is, can you stifle that triggered ability? And the answer is, it's a legal target for stifle, yeah. But they have an idea of what they want to have happen, but it's not what's going to happen. So in that case, I think the best way to give people customer service is to say, yeah, what are you attempting to have happen? That's a good one from Ollie. So yeah, I like that. So yeah, had this happened before? I don't doubt it. It's not the first time. So that's my personal opinion on the best way to handle that. I like what Ollie said there about what are you attempting to have happen. And yeah, it's like the Pithing Needle one. It's like the Spellskite one. Very, very similar. So, okay, next one, I want to revisit something that I said before, which is we kind of waved our hands a little bit at this with the Day of Judgment plus Hexplate Golem plus Disciple of the Vault. But I want people to really think about what's really happening in this question, right? So what's going to happen is Day of Judgment is going to destroy all creatures. So the Disciple of the Vault and the Hexplate Golem is both going to go to the graveyard, right? And then immediately after that happens, the fairies are going to check, and they're going to say, okay, is there any triggered abilities that need to go on the whiteboard? Now, the problem is that Disciple of the Vault is not on the battlefield anymore. So there's no triggered ability that says whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from play, target opponent loses 1 life. So with that being the case, why do you gain, or why does this triggered ability happen? How could it happen? Would be a better answer. So we've got some questions here, or we've got some responses here that say looking back, and so that is indeed exactly what happens. You use the last known information and you look back in time. So that's what happens, but why though, right? So why is it that you need to look back in time for this triggered ability? And indeed, why are certain triggered abilities why is it that certain triggered abilities have this special rule that we need to look at stuff in a different way than the way we look normally? And so to answer that question, we've got this stuff here. So some zone change triggers look back in time. Here's some other stuff from the CR. I actually did put this one in because I thought this was a good thing to have as a reference here. These are all the different types of triggers that look back in time. But why is it the case that we need to be able to do that? Well, it's like this. There's all kinds of triggered abilities that work, right? And what Shadow Water says is very, very close to the prepared answer that I had made up here. So when this dies wouldn't work if it wasn't on the battlefield to see its own death. Now, that's fine because we could just special case that stuff, right? So like, for example, you could just say when this dies, if it's in your graveyard, then ... Then that would work okay. But you know, a lot of different other stuff can happen, right? And the other stuff on this list, like for example, a permanent phases out, the game can't see stuff that phase out. A permanent leaves the battlefield, stuff can leave the battlefield and go to a different zone that the game can't see. Like a game can not see stuff that's in your hand, for example. So because of that, we can't just special case all this stuff and say, you know, when it's put into your graveyard. Those types of triggered abilities, for example, can work from the graveyard. And so the game can see the stuff moving around, but at a certain point, it's not a good idea to just keep on special casing stuff until it works to make it all work the same way. This is a more elegant solution, which is that abilities of these types of classes are the abilities that need to trigger looking back in time. And so what in fact does that mean is that anytime something happens in the game, the fairies look to see if that thing that happened in the game matches any triggered ability trigger conditions. Now, most of the time, it looks at the game state immediately before and checks the game state immediately after. And based on that transition, it checks to see if any triggered ability should have triggered. Okay, now, if your triggered ability is one of these ones on this list, the triggered ability is allowed to exist on the battlefield immediately before that happened. So, with our example of Hexplate Golem and Disciple of the Vault and Day of Judgment, what will happen is the following. Day of Judgment resolves, all creatures are destroyed, and then immediately after that happens, the fairies are like, okay, we need to check to see if there's any triggered abilities. They look at the game state immediately after that happened to see if it matches any current triggered abilities that are on the battlefield. But Disciple of the Vault's not on the battlefield. Instead, the fairies also have to look at the game state immediately before the event happened, and they see Disciple of the Vault is on the battlefield, and it has one of these special types of triggered abilities that was on the black on blue. And because of that, it's one of the special types of triggered abilities that can look back in time, so it does trigger. And it works. And so that is, in fact, the solution that Magic the Gathering's rules team has come up with for that situation. So, another situation that kind of is similar. We've got Grafted War Gear attached to some creature. Now, I threaten that creature, and then I boomerang the Grafted War Gear. What will happen? Is the creature sacrificed? Ooh, boy, this is a good one. We had like 6 yeses right in a row, and then there's like a bunch of no's. Oh, someone changed their mind. Alright, so we're boomeranging the Grafted War Gear, not the creature. All right, so enough voting. We've got like a reasonably decent split here between yes and no, almost exactly, and that's actually extremely impressive. So what will happen here? Well, let's take a look. Step 1 is we boomerang the Grafted War Gear. The Grafted War Gear is returned to its owner's hand. Of course, Threaten does not cause control of the Grafted War Gear to change. It only causes control of the creature to change. And so the game still has that triggered ability happen. It still has the when it becomes unattached from a creature, sacrifice that creature, because when this becomes unattached from a creature is one of those types of triggered abilities that can look back in time. However, when you return Grafted War Gear to its owner's hand, the person who originally controlled the creature is going to be the person that controls that triggered ability, because that's who Grafted War Gear's controller is, so that's who owns that trigger. So with the triggered ability from Grafted Wargear, looking back in time, the game state immediately before then, the person who controls Grafted Wargear will try to sacrifice the creature. And they will not be able to because by this time the threaten has moved the creature over to the other person's control. So, yes, this was... I will give myself like maybe one demerit as a question writer for putting some extra spice in there. Yes, the triggered ability from Grafted Wargear usually works exactly like it's supposed to. If there was no threaten and if I boomerang the Grafted Wargear, then you'd be perfectly good to sacrifice that creature because you can sacrifice the creature because you would control it. But with the threaten in the mix, the creature is not sacrificed because the Grafted Wargear is controlled by a different person from the person who controls the creature. Maybe a little bit underhanded of a question, right? But I think that one was kind of an interesting situation, so I put that one in there also. Ooh. Yeah, if Boomerang was in response to threaten, or if there was no threaten at all, for example, then yeah, there's no reason why this would be any different from a normal interaction where you would just you bounce the Grafted Wargear and it gets sacrificed. And the reason it gets sacrificed again is because the reason Grafted Wargear's triggered ability can work at all is because this is a type of triggered ability that can look back in time, and that's the reason why they had to make it one of those types of triggered abilities that can look back in time. All right, so that one was a little bit underhanded. I'll take a hit for that one. Next, for looking back in time, I clone Worldspine Worm. Worldspine Worm / clone dies and goes to the graveyard. What will happen? Do I get 3 tokens? And do I shuffle clone in? Alright, so it looks like we have... Pretty much everybody thinks that we should get the 3 tokens. And we are a lot more evenly split on do I shuffle the clone in. We've got about 2-1 in favor of shuffling the clone in. Alright, so that's very interesting. So, if you're a normal person, there's no reason at all that you would believe... How did they die? They got killed by a Doomblade, maybe. That seems like a pretty reasonable use of a Doomblade. So yeah, if you are a normal... Yeah, the clone. The clone is dying. The Worldspine Worm that we copied is still safe and sound. Okay, so this is one of those questions that I think is kind of weird and dumb, but this is how it works. So, because clone no longer is a copy of Worldspine Worm as soon as it dies, the clone / Worldspine Worm will have the triggered ability immediately before the event happens, and it will not have any triggered abilities immediately after the event happens. So only events that allow us to look back in time will trigger and be put on the whiteboard. Now, both of these triggered abilities are pretty similar, but one of them says when it dies, which definitely is one of the kind that can look back in time. And the other one says when it's put into a graveyard from anywhere. And there is a special rule in the comprehensive rules that says when this is put into a graveyard from anywhere, if it has the words from anywhere, it does not count as an ability that can look back in time. And that's kind of weird and kind of unusual. And the reason why it's the case is because from anywhere is something that Templators can use to make triggered abilities that can work from the graveyard. So there's a special extra baggage in the comprehensive rules that lets that thing happen. Yeah, Gitrog Monster works that way. Emrakul, the Eon's Torn works that way. A lot of the time, those types of triggers are worded that way, and that's the reason why. Otherwise, they have like Progenitus, where it's a replacement effect instead. We're kind of running low on time, so I'm gonna give a little bit shorter example, a little bit shorter overview of these next couple examples, so we can finish within 1 hour, like what we're supposed to. So, next question is on intervening if clauses. If we have a Felidar Sovereign, and the answer is yes, you gain 3 tokens. No, you do not shuffle in. You do not shuffle in because you cannot look back in time for triggered abilities that say from anywhere, and because of that, it will not have the triggered ability at the time immediately after the event happens, which is when you normally do. So, with these 2 cards, I am at 39 cards in my untap step. Can I win the game? Yes or no? Win the game this turn. And everybody is giving me a hard thumbs down. So, the answer to this is no, it does not work. Did I say? No, 39 life in my untap step. So, Felidar Sovereign's ability will not let you win the game this turn, and the reason is because, as people have said, it doesn't even trigger. So, this is what's called an intervening if triggered ability. If you have a triggered ability that says, at the beginning of your upkeep, or like some triggered condition, if, then da-da-da, that is an intervening if clause. The word intervening means coming in between. And so, the thing that has an if needs to be true at 2 times. It needs to be true immediately before the triggered ability is going to be triggering, and it needs to be true when the trigger resolves. And if it is not true at either of those times, then you will not get that trigger. And it's basically exactly the same as checking if a target is legal. That's the same exact times when you check if a target is legal. So that's kind of a way that you can remember that. So another interesting question. Let's say we have an Abzan Beastmaster, and there's a creature our opponent controls that has 2 toughness. Can I play Giant Growth on my Abzan Beastmaster in response and gain a card? Can I draw a card with Beastmaster, given that my opponent has a 2/2 creature in play? All right, so this is very interesting, right? Because we have a lot of people saying yes. Everybody is saying yes. And we've got one person who says no. So this one actually surprises me. I kind of figured that more people would be tricked by this. So the answer to this question is yes, you actually can draw a card. Why is this different? Because it is not an intervening if. It is a if that comes after the thing that happens. I have no idea if this is extremely confusing for people who speak and play Magic in a foreign language, like I imagine it would be. But yeah, the way it works is if the English text of the card has the word if in the end of the clause, at the end of the, after the thing that you get to do, then it's not an intervening if clause, and normal triggered abilities work normally. If the triggered ability has the if in between the thing that you get to do and the thing that causes the ability to trigger, that is an intervening if clause, and that's what the word intervening means in English, coming in between. So if the if clause does not come in between, it's not an intervening if clause, and it follows the normal rules of normal triggered abilities. Maybe some of our foreign people can help us out with that. So that was the last question that I had. Any these kinds of interactions are a big nightmare. See, that's kind of what I figured for people with So yeah, the question would be if they had a 2/2 in play. You can indeed, even if your opponent has a 2/2 in play, you can have an Abzan Beastmaster, giant growth your Abzan Beastmaster in response to the triggered ability that does trigger in this case, and you do get to draw a card in that case. So, any questions? And of course, like our friend the bridge from below, please be gentle. Hope you had a great time. Thank you for your attention.